дико, я shiny, пару лямов money on my neck, gold money rain.
It's my name, это мой money rain, no pain, no gain, иди нахуй Monday. Dobra, it's my name, ра-та-та, bang-bang, заряжай, бляха, моя baby mother. It's my name, это мой money.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the third part of What If Aizen Finds BEN10 in Bleach Verse. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of Bigby the Big Bad Wolf on fanfictionnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Aizen smiled softly at the human. You truly are a noble person, Ben. And considering that you don't look worse for wear, it seems you were able to hold your own against OMNITRIX. The fact that he was still in his sealed state does not take away the impressiveness of this feat. TCH, OMNITRIX scoffed. Is Apache okay? Ben asked, deciding to change the subject. She is currently in the medical room, undergoing treatment, Aizen said. Static can escort you there if you wish. Ben looked over at Static, seeing if he was up for it. The Prime Espada sighed, rubbing his head. Sure thing, he said tiredly. Ben shot one last look at OMNITRIX, who sneered at him once their eyes met. Aizen noticed the animosity between them. Ben, Aizen said, drawing the hero's attention to him. I will deal with OMNITRIX. You may go check on Apache. OMNITRIX gaped at Aizen, shocked at the idea of his leader punishing him for anything. Ben was more than willing to go another round with this creep, but he had a feeling that Aizen's word was final. But he was definitely going to keep an eye out for OMNITRIX from now on. Static took that as their cue to leave. Come on, Ben, he said as he put a hand on the hero's shoulder. The next thing Ben knew, everything was a big blur again. Obviously Stark's Senito. The next thing Ben knew, he was back indoors. Come on, Static said, already walking off. The medical room's this way. Right, Ben nodded, hurrying to catch up. Have to admit, that was a pretty bold move, Stark said as they walked. Taking on OMNITRIX like that. I had to do something, Ben replied. Still, you should consider yourself lucky, Stark told him. OMNITRIX's brutal, and he gets worse when a fight excites him. I'll keep that in mind, Ben said, refusing to back down to somebody like OMNITRIX. Stark saw the determined look in Ben's eyes and sighed. Suit yourself. The rest of the walk was done in silence, but both paused when they heard the sound of someone running down the hall. They didn't have to wait long when the runner came into view from around a corner, and it was none other than Lilynette. Her eye went wide when she saw who was in front of her. Ben, she shouted. You're alive. Ha, Ben said as he crossed his arms. Surprised? Duh, Lilynette retorted, causing Ben to slump in annoyance. I can't believe you're still alive, let alone standing, after a fight with OMNITRIX. Her eye completely bugged out. She pointed a shaky finger at the wielder of the Ultimatrix. Did you win? I stepped in before things got heavy, Stark said. Lilynette pouted, apparently disappointed that Ben hadn't actually defeated OMNITRIX. But from what I saw, they were completely at a stalemate. Lilynette stared at Ben in newfound awe. A human who not only stood up to the fifth Espada, but was capable of fighting him to a standstill? Okay, Ben said. To be fair, OMNITRIX hadn't gone into that released state thing. So? Lilynette snapped at him. The Espada are still pretty strong without using their resurrection. She grinned. Oh, man, this is big. I wonder how everyone else is going to react. Ben gulped as Lilynette's words weighed heavy on him. He had a feeling his skirmish with OMNITRIX was going to be the talk of Las Noches. How would the other Espada react to this? Especially Grimmjow, who had shown an interest in him too. What were you doing anyway, Lilynette? Stark wondered. Oh, Harable went to go check up on her Fraxian, Lilynette replied. It looked like they wanted to be left alone, so I decided to give them some privacy. How's Apache doing? Ben inquired. Not bad, Lilynette said casually. OMNITRIX got her good, but it's nothing that can't be patched up. The nurse said she should be just fine. Ben let out a sigh of relief. Well, that's good. What about the other two? A little sore, but that's about it, Lilynette informed him. Ben smiled. I'm glad they're going to be all right. Lillinette huffed as she crossed her arms and stared in Ben with a scrutinizing gaze similar to the one she had used on before this whole happened. "What?" Ben asked. "I don't get it," the little Arankar said. "Why are you being so nice to them after everything they did?" "Well, I'm not gonna lie. It was really annoying the way they kept twisting everything I said," Ben admitted. "But at the same time, they didn't deserve to be treated like that." Lillinette groaned. "I think you're a little too forgiving." Ben laughed. "I guess I can be. I mean, my best friend's a guy who tried to kill me when we were kids." Static and Lillinette both gawked at him. Their reaction was so priceless, Ben couldn't help grinning. "Are you serious?" Lillinette asked. "Uh-huh," Ben said, still amused at the looks on their faces. "Of course, it's a long story and all, but—" Ben paused at the sudden appearance of Tia Harable, who was standing at the end of the hall. The third Espada crossed her arms under her breasts and began walking towards the other three. "Hello, Harable," Stark said casually. "Static," Harable replied civilly. She gave Ben a brief glance before looking back at her comrade. "I would like to speak with him alone." Well, this took Ben by surprise. Starik looked back and forth between Harable and Ben. "All right," he said. "Come on, Lillinette." "What?" Lillinette exclaimed. "What's the big deal? Can't we stay?" "I said come on," Stark said, a bit of firmness in his tone. Lillinette glared at the other Arankar but relented. "Fine, fine." She ran after him. So now it was just Ben and Harable alone in the hallway. The two said nothing, just looked at each in silence. For Ben it was an awkward silence, but he didn't know what Harable thought about it. Eager to end it, Ben opened his mouth to say something but Harable beat him to it. "I have some things I wish to say to you, Ben, she told him. Ben flinched, worried that she was upset with him for some reason. Was she as mad at him as her Frexiani were? Did she think it was his view fault they got hurt? "First," Harable began, "I would like to apologize on behalf of my Frexiani." Well, that took Ben by surprise. They had made it perfectly clear how much they hated you for your apparent disrespect towards me. I told them not to worry over such a trivial thing, but it seems they, especially Apache, refused to let it go. I should have known they would do something foolish and did more to rein them in. Well now, Ben looked at the ground, unable to think of anything to say. It was nice to know that at least Harable herself didn't hate his guts. "Second," Harable went on, "you had every reason not to help my Frexiani. Yet despite their treatment of you, not only did you protect them, you were willing to face one of the Espada to do so. I thank you for your kindness." Ben couldn't help smiling at her words. Not because of the praise, but the fact that Harable seemed to really care about her Fraxian's well-being. Maybe their zealous loyalty wasn't completely unfounded. "I am also impressed you are still alive, let alone in perfect health, after facing Enoitra Gilga," Harable commented. "But be cautious, Ben, for you have gained a deadly enemy. Enoitra does not forgive, and he will go to any lengths to settle a score." Harable was then taken by surprise at the sudden look of determination on Ben's face. "Well, you know what I say to that," he said. "I say bring it on. I've faced tons of guys back home who've tried to kill me, but I always came out on top. I'm not gonna back down from a jerk like him. He's just another name to add to the list." Harable just stared at Ben, amazed by his words and conviction. She closed her eyes. "You are either extremely brave or extremely foolish. Perhaps a bit of both." Ben grinned. "Okay, I'll admit I am a little of both. But hey, I've gotten this far." Was Harable's reply before she turned around and started heading back the way she came. "I am going to check up on Apache and the others again. Then I'm going to remind Enoitra why it is ill-advised to attack another Espada's Fraxiani." The sudden coldness in her voice left a shiver running down Ben's spine. He did not want to be in Enoitra's shoes right now. Not that he ever would on a good day. Before turning around the corner, Harable spared Ben one last parting glance. "Thank you again, Ben, and good luck." With that, she left. Once she left, Ben let out a great big sigh. Well, this has been quite the eventful day, and he had only just gotten here. Still, he couldn't get Harable's words out of his head. While all the advice was appreciated, he already figured Enoitra would be gunning for him. Ben had managed to hold his own, but he had a strong feeling the fifth espada hadn't been going all out. Sure, Ben himself hadn't gone all out either, but with all these things a Rankar can do, Sonido, Zero, Resurrection, Hyro, and possibly much more, it would be risky to fight OMNITRIX again unprepared. Now Ben was used to fighting new enemies blindly, especially when he was a kid, but it sounded like doing that here might get him killed. If he wanted to stand a chance, he needed to find out all he could about a Rankar. Ben turned around and walked back the way he came. He hoped Stark and Lilinet didn't go too far. He wasn't in the mood to get lost in this place. But it seemed he didn't need to worry because the two were walking right towards him. And the grin on Lilinet's face probably meant they had overheard his conversation with HAREM. Well, look at you, making friends with HAREM, Lilinet teased him. I don't know if we're friends, Ben said to her. If anything, we're just on positive-ish terms. That's more than any of us can say, Static told him. HAREM and her Fraxione usually keep to themselves. The fact that you're on her good side is an accomplishment in itself. Ben said as he crossed his arms. Then he remembered what he wanted to talk to these two about. Hey guys. Yeah, Lilinet asked. I need your help, Ben said. About what? Stark asked. I would like to learn more about a Rankar, Ben answered. Want to be ready in case OMNITRIX wants a rematch? Stark guessed. Okay, what was it with people here knowing exactly what he wanted to do? First Aizen, now Stark? It was scary. Or was he really that obvious? Since Stark wasn't bothering to beat about the bush, Ben didn't either. Yeah. Stark sighed, acting more as if he had just been asked to move a mountain. Well, I guess I can't always be there to bail you out, and Lord Aizen would probably prefer you being able to handle stuff on your own. All right, but let's get back first so I can least rest while I'm explaining. Ben grinned at his good fortune. Works for me. With that, the three started on their way back to Stark's palace. Grimjow Jigerjakas was in a sour mood. Of course, by now everybody knew about what had happened between BEN10, HAREM's Fraxion, and OMNITRIX. But what bothered him was the really juicy part of the rumors, the fact that Tennyson took on OMNITRIX and managed to fight him evenly. Now OMNITRIX made it very clear to anybody within earshot that he had not been fighting all out. Anybody here could vouch for that claim because they would have sensed him entering his released state if he had. Still, the fact that this strange human was able to fight on par with one of the 5 most powerful espada was enough for gossip and concern. But what did this have to do with Grimjow personally? Well, another major topic of discussion regarding Tennyson was how well he would do against the other espada. And some were figuring that if he could hold his own against the 5th espada, he could very well easily do the same against the espada lower than OMNITRIX, of which Grimjow was included. The thought made the 6th espada growl in aggravation. You're troubled, Grimjow, noted the leader of his Fraxion, Xiaolong Kufang. Grimjow turned to face him. The Rankar had a long face and black hair that was braided and hung over the side. The remains of his mask were located on his head in the form of a sort of hat. A dropped portion of it covered the upper left half of his face, and a long spike jutted out from the right of the hat. It's annoying how all those idiots think that just because Tennyson could fight OMNITRIX without dying means that he's a match for me, Grimjow said. I suppose it can't be helped, said Eldrad Lyones. Simply because OMNITRIX is ranked just above you. Eldrad was a large man with a half-shaven head, noticeably by the red hair that flowed over the unshaven part. His mask remains took on the form of what one could mistake for sunglasses resting on his nose. His shirt was open, revealing the gaping hollow hole in his chest. I don't like it, said Ylfort Grants, a man with blonde hair and mask remains that resembled a helmet on his head. His hollow hole was just visible through the slit in the upper half of his jacket. This kid shows up out of nowhere, claiming to be from another universe, with a gauntlet that turns him into aliens powerful enough to fight the espada. Eldrad smirked at his comrade. I'll bet Shiloporos just itching to learn more about him. Ylfort groaned at the mention of his brother. Don't even get me started on him. Nonetheless, I believe Ylfort is onto something, Xiaolong said. We know that at least one of his transformations is as powerful as a sealed espada, but we still don't know how strong the rest are, let alone how many the boy can become. Tennyson is a wild card, and we're taking too much of a risk by letting him stay here. So, said DeRoy Linker, with a sinister smile on his face. Should we deal with him? DeRoy was a short male Arankar with mask remains consisting of a bulky helmet that looked a bit like a hammerhead shark. The right-hand side of his mask was wrapped in bandages, covering up his right eye. His square, shark-like teeth were showing thanks to his wicked smile. "Sounds like suicide to me," Yilfort said with a frown. "He's under Stack's protection, remember? You really want to tangle with the Prime Espada. Not to mention that he's probably got Hannibal on his side now," Eldrad pointed out. DeRoy paled considerably when he took this into account. As eager as he was to put this Tennyson kid in his place, he wasn't up for facing two of the most powerful Arankar in Lost Notches to do it. Grimjow heard what his Phyrexiani were saying, but kept his reactions to himself. While Shalong had a point by saying the kid was a potential threat, that wasn't what truly bothered Grimjow. No, what bothered him was the thought of a human being better than him. He refused to accept that a human, regardless of whatever power they had, could be superior to him. Ben Tennyson needed to be taken down. Now. Grimjow's Phyrexian all froze when they noticed their leader sporting a wicked, bestial grin, like a savage animal about to attack. "You have a plan," Shalong stated, not asking. Grimjow smirked at his second-in-command. "Oh yeah." Ben was walking down one of Lost Notch's various hallways. He had been trying to memorize the place's layout so he wouldn't get lost, but at the moment he was too deep in thought. Earlier, Stark had informed him more about the basic abilities of Hollows. Ben ran the list through his mind. Arankar had super strength and speed, energy blasts, hardened skin, levitation, and a secondary form with additional powers. These guys were no joke, that's for sure. So what did that say about the Soul Reapers they were going to be fighting against? Speaking of Soul Reapers, what exactly could they do compared to Arankar? What could Aizen himself do? "Hey Ben," a shrill voice suddenly punctured his thoughts, and quite possibly his eardrums. "Ah," Ben cried out, jumping and doing everything he could not to fall over. He turned around and shot an annoyed look at the instigator, a smirking Lilynette. "Hello, Lilynette." Lilynette just grinned cheekily at him. "Hey, Ben, you were really zoned out there." "So you decided to try and make me deaf?" Ben asked, putting a finger in his ear. "That's nothing," Lilynette grinned. "You should see the stuff I usually do to Stack." "You mean aside from stomping and kicking him around?" Ben commented. Lilynette chuckled. "Oh yeah." Ben blanched, wondering just what else she did to torment the poor guy. "I'll take your word for it," he said. Lilynette just crossed her arms and smirked proudly. The look reminded Ben a lot of the times he and Gwen used to play pranks on each other as kids. The thought of Gwen caused Ben to immediately think of home. It was hard to believe that already a day or so had passed since he had first arrived here. He wondered how everybody was doing back home. They must have known he was missing by now, and probably worried sick. He could just imagine his parents freaking out over his disappearance and Grandpa Max trying to find some way to find him and bring him back, probably with Gwen's help. Lilynette noticed the change in Ben's mood. "You all right?" Ben gave her a small smile. "Oh, nothing, just thinking about what might be going on back home." Lilynette walked up beside him. "You really miss it, huh?" She supposed she could understand that. If she had been taken away from Hugo Mundo and forced to live in a completely different place, she would have missed the desert too. Ben's smile grew. "Yeah." "Is it scary?" she asked him with honesty. "Being in another universe." Ben chuckled. "Well, this isn't the first time I've been away from my world, or even my universe." "Wait," Lilynette stared at him. "You've been to another universe before?" Ben chuckled. "Yeah. You honestly wouldn't believe the adventures I've had back where I come from." Lilynette scooted closer to him. "So tell me." Ben leaned back at the sudden invasion of personal space. "Oh, come on," Lilynette urged. "If you're gonna stay with us, we should know you a little better, and it's not like we've got anything better to do around here." Well, she had a point there. Ben had checked. No video games, no television, no smoothies. This place seemed to be the land of boredom. What exactly did Arankar do in their free time? Just lay around like Sterk did? Realizing that he had very little choice in the matter, Ben sighed. "All right, where should I start?" "Why not tell me about when you first got that Ultimatrix?" Ben chuckled as he looked down at the Ultimatrix. He knew it was a matter of time before somebody asked him more about that thing. Luckily, he already had a plan for when that happened. Well, in order for me to explain I got the Ultimatrix, I'll really need to start at the beginning. See, it all started when I was 10 years old and going on a road trip with my cousin and grandpa. This already got Lillinette's attention. 10 years old. Ben had gained his power when he was just a child? When we got to the camping site, I decided to go exploring in the woods and then... Well, you two seem to be having a good time. Ben and Lillinette froze when they found none other than a smirking Grimmjow and his Fraxian standing before them. Ben resisted the urge to blanch again. Lillinette wasn't thrilled to see Grimmjow either. "What do you want?" she demanded. Ben had a feeling that he already knew what the sixth Espada wanted. Grimmjow's smirk grew. "Well, I heard about how Tennyson here did so well against OMNITRIX. Congratulations. Looks like you've got some moves after all. So, I've decided that I want to see what you can really do. Why don't you and I have a nice little spar? No holding back this time. I want to see what you really got." Before Ben could react in any way, Grimmjow shot forward and grabbed him by his collar. Lillinette was about to object when Nakim came up behind her. He clamped one hand over her mouth and used the other to grab her in a one-armed bear hug. "Hey!" Ben yelled. "Let her go." He was about to go for the Ultimatrix when Grimmjow slammed him into the wall. He grit his teeth as pain shot through his back. Grimmjow got right up in Ben's face. "Here's the deal, Tennyson. I want to fight you and I don't want her running off to Stalk and cutting our fun off early." "Some fun," Ben groaned. If he could just reach the Ultimatrix and go hero fast enough, he could hopefully take all these guys down and bolt for it. "Besides, you're a hero, right?" the Arankar went on before looking over at Lillinette, who was currently glaring daggers at him. Grimmjow just sneered in amusement. "From what I hear, you're more willing to spring into action when someone's in danger." Lillinette's eyes widened as Ben easily picked up on Grimmjow's unspoken threat. Lillinette shook her head furiously, kicking her legs against Nakim in a futile attempt to break free. All she managed to do was get him to tighten his grip. Ben knew he was in a fix. It was possible he could go hero and free himself from Grimmjow, but would he be able to save Lillinette before that big lug hurt her? Grimmjow, who had looked back at him, chuckled when he saw the calculating look on his face. "Don't even think about going alien, Tennyson." He looked back at Nakim and nodded. Nakim nodded and tightened his grip even further. Lillinette's eyes widened as she felt her head being squeezed, her screams muffled by her captor's massive hand. "All right," Ben yelled, seeing no way out of this, as he glared at Grimmjow. "I'll fight you, just leave her alone." Grimmjow's grin was as wide as could be, making him look like some kind of deranged Cheshire cat. He looked back at his Fraxian in triumph. "Let's go." His Fraxian nodded, sporting their own smirks. Lillinette looked at Ben apologetically. Ben just gave her an encouraging smile. He would find a way to take down Grimmjow and his Fraxian and get her to safety. Ben and Lillinette were led outside of Los Notches, the moon shining bright in the dark sky. Despite the situation, Ben wondered where Runaganga was. Could it be that he was in on Grimmjow's scheme, or did he sense an Espada was nearby and decided to back off? Speaking of Grimmjow, his smirk was still on his face and his hands in his pockets as he and Ben faced down each other. His Fraxian, with Lillinette still in Nakim's clutches, stood off to the side. "All right, Grimmjow," Ben said firmly. "You have what you want, now let Lillinette go." "And have her go to Stack?" Grimmjow asked rhetorically. "I don't think so. And don't even think it about using your aliens to just run away. If you want her unharmed, you need to fight me with everything you've got." "And then you'll just let us go?" Ben asked skeptically. "By then I'll already have what I want," Grimmjow replied. "What would be the point?" Ben sighed through his nose as he weighed his options. He was used to handling multiple opponents, but he couldn't risk taking on 6 different Arankars, including an Espada, without knowing their capabilities. Also, what would his Fraxian do if Ben beat Grimmjow? Would they try to gang up on him while he was exhausted? Or would they back off at seeing their leader beaten? Of course he could always let Grimmjow win, but the Espada had to be pretty observant. Who knows how'd he react if he learned Ben lost on purpose? Too many factors, too many possibilities. Ben saw that he had no choice but to wing it and wait for an opportunity. "All right," he said. Grimmjow shifted his stance, taking more of a fighting pose. "Now you can go alien." "Much appreciated," Ben muttered dryly as he activated the Ultimatrix. He needed to take Grimmjow down as soon as possible. And he knew just the type of alien to do it too. He slammed the dial down. Grimmjow laughed maniacally as Ben's body was bathed in green light. Despite his eagerness to establish his self-proclaimed superiority, he found himself actually anticipating this battle for the sake of a good fight. When the green light faded, what stood before the Arrancar was a red-skinned, rather muscular, 12-foot-tall alien whose most notable features were his 2 pairs of heavy-set 4-fingered arms. He also sported 2 pairs of green eyes, a main pair with a second, smaller pair right underneath them. The alien had a black stripe that ran down from his lower lip to his chin, vaguely resembling a beard and a slicked-back black ponytail. His clothing was rather simple: gold wrist and ankle bands, black underwear with a golden waistband, and 2 golden sashes across his chest. Grimmjow eyed this new form with interest. It looked tough, now to see if it was. "So, heard you give your aliens fancy names like that diamond-head guy you used against OMNITRIX. What's this one called?" The alien grinned as he pounded his fists into his palms. "Meet fourarms," he said in a raspy voice. Grimmjow actually paused when he heard the alien's name. "Seriously?" Fourarms blinked with all 4 of his eyes. "What?" Grimmjow snorted. "You actually named a guy with 4 arms fourarms?" Fourarms scowled. "Hey, cut me some slack. I named this guy when I was a kid." Grimmjow's eyes narrowed with interest. "Is that right? A kid, huh? So you've had these powers for quite some time." Fourarms resisted the urge to smack himself, realizing that he just walked into that one. "Which means you have quite a lot of experience," Grimmjow went on, the eagerness all but oozing out of his voice. "Good. That means this should be a really good fight." The Tetraman tensed up, slowly shifting into a fighting stance. He might not be sure what Grimmjow was capable of, but he was confident he could handle it. He had just as much experience with 4 arms as he did Diamond. Unfortunately, his self-reassurance was cut short as Grimmjow used his Sunito to appear right in front of Fourarms and punched him right in the gut with enough force to make the mighty alien topple over. Grimmjow took the initiative to unleash a powerful kick that sent Fourarms sprawling to the ground. Just as the Tetraman was starting to pick himself, Grimmjow shot forward and began unleashing a flurry of punches and kicks. Fourarms was helpless against the 6th Espada's ruthless onslaught. Grimmjow was just as powerful as him and had speed that rivaled XLR-8. Arrancar finished his barrage with a spin kick that sent Fourarms flying a good distance away, his body eventually smacking into a dune of sand. Lillinet screamed for Ben, but it was too muffled by Nakim's hand to be coherent. "Ha," DeRoy sneered. "This is the guy who fought OMNITRIX to a standstill. He's pathetic." "DeRoy," Shalong chided his comrade. Grimmjow caught him off guard. "While I still doubt he's any match for our king, I'm certain he has more to offer than this." DeRoy grumbled at being chewed out by Shalong, but nonetheless said nothing as he continued watching. Fourarms groaned as he sat up from the sand. "Whoa, what a headache. His fighting style is completely different than OMNITRIX." He eyed Grimmjow's Zanpakuto warily. "And he hasn't even drawn his sword yet. If he's this good in a fistfight, how good is he with a sword?" Grimmjow had a bored look on his face. "Come on, Tennyson, don't tell me this is all you got." Though he did notice that despite the pummeling he just gave Fourarms, the alien didn't really look worse for wear. Fourarms grinned as he wiped his mouth with one of his lower arms. "Buddy, I'm barely starting." Grimmjow's face lit up again. "Ha, I knew you couldn't be taken down with just a few hits like that." Fourarms flexed his muscles. "I may not have some fancy skin-hardening moves like your Hyro, but I can take a lot of punishment." "Good, I'd hate for this to be over so soon." He used Sunito again to appear right next to Fourarms, ready for another onslaught. Only for Fourarms to grab his hand before it could make contact. Grimmjow's eyes widened while Fourarms decided to smirk this time. "Also," the Tetraman said, "I've got really good reflexes." Fourarms swung Grimjow overhead, smashing the Espada face first right into the sand. But he didn't get time to do anything before Fourarms swung him again, slamming him into the sand back first. Grinning mischievously, Fourarms hoisted his opponent into the air again, but instead of slamming him into the ground, he twirled Grimjow like a bola before letting him go, watching the Espada soar through the air before slamming into the ground again. Leroy gaped, but the rest of Grimjow's Fraxian were more neutral than surprised. Lilinet let out a sigh of relief at seeing that Ben was okay and fighting back. "See, Leroy," Edrad said. "The boy is more impressive than you give him credit for." Yilfort smirked. "Sure, he's got some moves, but Grimjow still hasn't gone all out. He won't last." That was fun, but Fourarms readied himself, strongly doubting that was enough to finish him. True enough, Grimjow got back up to his feet, looking more amused than wounded. "Now that's more like it," Grimjow laughed. "You do make good prey, Tennyson." "Oh thanks," Fourarms replied uneasily. "But just because you got a few good hits in," a red light started forming around Grimjow's fist, "doesn't mean you can get cocky." He thrust his arm out as if he was punching, sending what appeared to be a red ball of energy right at Fourarms. The brawling alien's reflexes kicked in, and he crossed all four of his arms in front of him. The energy ball struck his arms, blasting him backwards while digging 2 trenches in the sand. Fourarms remembered how Stark told him a Rancor had 2 kinds of energy blasts. The first was Zero and the other was Bala. It was smaller and weaker than a Zero, but it was faster and, as Fourarms just felt, had a lot of concussive force. Fourarms lowered his hands to see Grimjow shooting straight at him. He caught the Espada's kick, only for Grimjow to pivot his body and kick out at Fourarms with his other foot. Unfortunately for the Arankar, Fourarms grabbed that leg too. Smirking at Grimjow's wide-eyed expression, Fourarms punched him with both of his lower arms, blasting his opponent backwards. Although in pain from the blows, Grimjow managed to adjust himself, sliding across the desert sand. He charged up his fists and began unleashing another bala. Fourarms moved out of the way in the time, only for a second one to come straight at him. This one, however, hit the ground near Fourarms, sending him flying thanks to the sheer force of the explosion. The Tetraman didn't have enough time to collect because Grimjow appeared next to him, punching him across the face. Fourarms staggered, which Grimjow saw as an opening. But just as he got close enough, he was caught in a bear hug by Fourarms' lower arms. The upper ones reared back, before striking either side of Grimjow's head. He yelled in pain from the blows. Snarling in anger, he managed to break out of Fourarms' hold with an impressive show of force before tilting back and kicking his opponent right under the chin. This stunned Fourarms long enough for Grimjow to punch him right in his solar plexus. Now it was Fourarms' turn to slide backwards from the sheer force of the blow. Grimjow went on the attack again, but Fourarms had another trick up his sleeve. He reached back with all 4 of his arms as far as he could before slamming them together into one big clap. The force of the clap created a powerful shockwave that blasted Grimjow all the way back to Los Notches. His Fraxian's eyes were wide as they saw their leader slam into the dome's wall. Fourarms waited with anticipation. Was that it? Was Grimjow done? His answer came in the form of a massive red beam shooting straight at him. Grimjow had fired a Zero. Oh boy, Fourarms crouched down as low as he could, then leaped into the air. His legs were every bit as strong as his arms, and they allowed him to jump right over the Zero before it could hit him. Unfortunately, he had little time to celebrate his accomplishment, because as the Zero passed under him, Grimjow suddenly tackled him. Caught off guard, Fourarms wasn't able to react in time as the Espada grabbed his right lower arm, and with a sinister smile on his face, Grimjow proceeded to tear the limb right off. Fourarms roared as blood gushed out of his open wound. Lilinet thrashed wildly in Nakim's grasp. She managed to wiggle enough space to open her mouth and bite down hard on her captor's hand. Hissing in pain, Nakim removed his hand, allowing Lilinet to speak again. "BEN," she cried as the human she could get along with plummeted to the ground, sand shooting everywhere from the impact of his landing. Fourarms was in a world of pain right now. Sure, he was used to his limbs getting torn off, cut off, shot off, but that happened whenever he was an alien that could grow it back. Fourarms clutched the stump where his arm used to be. That feral smile still on his face, Grimjow tossed said disembodied arm to the side. Those extra arms of yours are a pain in the ass. So I figured I might as well get rid of them. You bastard! Lilinet yelled at him before Nakim covered her mouth again. She glared bloody murder at him, but the bigger Arankar gave her no mind. Now you got in, Grimjow, DeRoy cheered. He still has 3 arms left, Edrad pointed out. He's not out of the game yet. Grimjow casually made his way over to fourarms. Edrad's right. You do still have 3 arms. I hope losing just one didn't weaken you too bad, though you might want to call yourself 3 arms now. Fourarms glared at Grimjow. You're down, but you're not out, Grimjow figured. Go ahead, turn into a different alien. Even without his gloating, Ben knew Grimjow was right. He couldn't risk continuing the fight in this condition. He grabbed the Ultimatrix dial and was engulfed in another flash of light. Fourarms was gone, and in his place was a tall humanoid, plant-like alien with a green and black-colored body, a flame-patterned head and root-like feet that looked like they were latching onto rocks. His eyes were oval-shaped with points at each end with pupils bearing a similar, yet smaller shape. His shoulders and head had red petals while his elbows and legs sported green frills. Grimjow eyed this new alien. Not bad. Sudden he caught a whiff of a rotting scent, grimacing in disgust. Considering that the smell appeared the same time as Ben's new alien, it wasn't hard to put 2 and 2 together. Ugh, so what's his name? Stinkweed? Hilarious, the new alien muttered in a very nasally, stuffed-up voice. If you think smelling bad is going to stop me, think again, Grimjow shot forward. Unlike before, the new guy didn't even try to defend himself. That suited Grimjow just fine as he punched right through the plant creature's torso. Lilinet's eyes widened again. Grimjow and his Fraxian were certain he had dealt a fatal blow, only for Grimjow to look up and see his opponent looking surprisingly nonplussed before grinning. Sorry, that kind of stuff doesn't bother this guy, he replied before slugging Grimjow in the face, knocking the espada back. Grimjow glared at his opponent, only for his eyes to widen as the gaping hole he put in Ben's torso closed. High-speed regeneration? Grimjow exclaimed. Yeah, kinda the reason why I picked him. Oh, and by the way, Grimjow's eyes widened as fire suddenly ignited in the plant alien's hands. This guy is called Swampfire. Now it was Grimjow's turn to be under a barrage as Swampfire began pelting fireball after fireball at him, snarling in pain as the flames scorched him. What the? DeRoy tilted his head in confusion. A plant creature with fire powers? How does that work? Methane, or something similar, Shalong noted. DeRoy looked at him. Methane? The smell coming from this Swampfire, Edred said. This alien has the power to produce a flammable gas, most likely methane, and is capable of igniting it to use fire-based attacks. This, combined with the power of high-speed regeneration, does make him an admirable foe. Yilfort scowled. This kid's just full of tricks. I'd say it's time we wrapped this up, Swampfire said, ending his assault. But before Grimjow had time to question what the Methanosian was doing, Swampfire began throwing seeds at Grimjow's feet. The Arankar would have taken the time to mock his opponent for whatever he was trying to do if the seeds hadn't suddenly started growing into massive vines. What the? Grimjow said as the vines began wrapping him up. He struggled to break free, but Swampfire just kept adding more vines to the ones already constricting around him. Shalong narrowed a calculating eye at Swampfire. So not only does he possess power over fire, he can also control plants produced from the seeds on his body. It can be assumed he is able to control natural plants as well. High-speed regeneration, creating flames, controlling plants, and he seems pretty strong, Yilfort frowned. Shiloporo would just love to dissect this guy on one of his operating tables. Lilinet, despite her predicament, couldn't help but be impressed too. But would this Swampfire's power be enough to stop Grimjow? Damn it, Grimjow swore as the vines completely immobilized him. He shot Swampfire an ugly look, though he couldn't help but acknowledge his adversary's skills. You just keep busting out one trick after another, don't you, Tennyson? Swampfire grinned. Just wait for my next one. He raised his hands and began releasing a green gas from his palms. Ugh, DeRoy exclaimed, covering mouth and nose with a hand. That reeks. So he can actually release the gas too, Xiaolong commented. Suddenly his eye shot open as the implications of this dawned on him. But that means... Grimjiao's eyes widened as he too had a feeling about what Swampfire was going to do. Still grinning, Swampfire stopped releasing the gas, having created a sizable amount of the stuff around Grimjiao. Swampfire then raised his hand, snapped his fingers, and Grimjiao found himself engulfed in an explosion of flame. All the spectating Arrancar were stunned speechless at Swampfire's latest ability. Edrad frowned deeply. All of these abilities, and at one alien's disposal. Indeed, I can see why Lord Aizen would view him as an asset to our cause. But what if he turned on us? Yilfort pointed out. A fair statement, Yilfort, Xiaolong said. But for now, let's just see what happens here first. Swampfire looked at the aftermath of his explosion. There were burning remains of his vines everywhere, but he had yet to find Grimjiao. Huh, Swampfire muttered as he rubbed his head, still looking around. Maybe I overdid it. Suddenly Swampfire found an incredible pressure raining down upon his body. Whatever it was incredible, forcing him down to one knee. Hey, he exclaimed. Who turned up the gravity? The smoke and flames were blown away by a whirlwind kicked up from ground zero, revealing Grimjiao. His skin was burned, his clothes were scorched, and he looked pretty angry. But that's not what got Swampfire's attention. No, what got his attention was the strange blue aura emitted around the Espada's body. That's new, Swampfire couldn't help saying at the strange sight. Ah, so you are not familiar with spiritual pressure yet, Xiaolong noted. Spiritual pressure, Swampfire couldn't help asking. We spiritual beings have the ability to release our energy as a physical force outside our bodies, Xiaolong explained. Our raw power, as it were, and depending on the amount of spiritual pressure one has, it can, as you put it, feel as if gravity has increased. Swampfire scowled at Lillinet. Would have been really nice to know that. Lillinet shot him a helpless look and shrugged, or as close as she could. Spiritual pressure is also how the Espada are ranked, Xiaolong added. Swampfire stared at him. Wait, what? He looked over at Grimjiao. You mean you guys are just ranked by how much energy you have, not on your personal skills and abilities? Perhaps Lord Aizen chose to do so for the sake of simplicity, Xiaolong said with a shrug. Then he sported a light smirk. Or maybe he did it so that enemies could underestimate the true capabilities of the Espada. If Swampfire hadn't realized he was in a tight spot before, he was now. Not that he thought fighting Grimjiao would be easier than fighting OMNITRIX just because he was a rank lower, but to learn the ranking had a really flawed method did not comfort him in the slightest. BEN10, Grimjiao said, his voice dangerously low and setting everyone else on edge. I have to admit, I underestimated you. I thought that just because you could face OMNITRIX didn't mean you were a match for me. Swampfire narrowed his eyes. I thought toying with you would be enough, but all it did was let you make a fool out of me. Grimjiao's aura flared with more power and Swampfire felt the pressure increase on him. I guess, Grimjiao's hand went to his sword, it's time to stop playing around. He drew his sword, a blue-handled katana with a sort of crooked S for a crossguard. Lillinet's eyes widened. Out of all the Espada, Grimjiao was the one who favored hand-to-hand combat the most. But he was just as deadly with a sword as they were. And when he finally got around to using it, Xiaolong noticed the smaller Arrancar's distressed look and smiled. So you've come to the same conclusion as we all have. Lillinet's eyes darted toward him. This fight is over now. Still, DeRoy said. Tennyson got Grimjiao to draw his blade. He only does that against foes who really impress him. BEN10 should consider it a great honor that he is to be taken down by Grimjiao's sword, Edrad said. Ha, Yilfort chuckled. This is the end. Lillinet looked back at Swampfire. She was surprised at how concerned she was for this human who just came into their midst, and hoped against hope that he had some kind of trick that would get him out of this mess. Grimjiao darted at Swampfire, who unleashed jets of flames from his hands, only for Grimjiao to disappear. The next thing the Methanosian knew, something cleaved through his middle. His body split in two, both halves hitting the ground. Pushing his upper half up, Swampfire turned his head to see Grimjiao standing behind him. Swampfire scowled as vines from his upper body started reaching out towards his lower body. Huh, Grimjow said, noticing this. So you can also put yourself back together if you're cut up. Must be nice, being able to heal yourself like that. But I wonder. Grimjow sliced through Swampfire's neck, the hero's decapitated head face planted into the ground. How much you can recover from? And so Grimjow began hacking away at his body, slicing through his plant body even as it tried to heal itself from the injuries. But he couldn't regenerate fast enough at the rate Grimjow was attacking. Needless to say, Grimjow was pleased to know this. Now, Grimjow raised his hand and began gathering energy for a Zero. I wonder if you can regenerate from being completely obliterated. Lilinet thrashed harder than ever, kicking and screaming into Nakim's hand. This couldn't be the end. It just couldn't be. She had come to see Ben as something like a friend. He couldn't die now, but all hope seemed lost. Even if Swampfire managed to regenerate in time, Lilinet doubted he could survive a point-blank Zero, especially since it would ignite the methane in his body. Grimjow had that deranged look on his face as he prepared to fire. Goodbye, BEN10. But he was cut short as something struck his side, sending him flying away from Swampfire's remains, smacking into the ground. Angry at the unexpected interference, Grimjow struggled to sit up. His eyes narrowed and a growl escaped his lips when he saw who had stopped him. Well, Noitra sneered, hoisting his weapon over his shoulder. I was wondering what could be causing your spiritual pressure to flare up so badly, Grimjow. And I find you deciding to get acquainted with Tennyson. Grimjow clenched his fists. Of all the people to stop him from establishing his dominance. Noitra chuckled. Let me guess, Grimjow. You didn't like all those rumors about Tennyson being better than you and the other weaker Espada, so you decided to deal with Tennyson yourself. Damn you, Grimjow muttered under his breath. Noitra just gave a huge grin. But you see, Tennyson and I haven't finished our fight, so I can't have you defeating him before I can. You bastard! Grimjow got to his feet. Gotta say though, Noitra looked Grimjow's body over with amusement. Tennyson sure did a number on you. Maybe there's some truth to those rumors after all. What? Grimjow bellowed. I would have won if you hadn't interfered. Oh please, Noitra scoffed. Seems to me you only would have won because Tennyson chose the wrong alien, not because you were better. What did you say? Grimjow yelled. Noitra looked over at the pile of weeds that started growing together and meshing into a slightly humanoid shape. A plant alien with regeneration powers, eh? I wonder. Noitra started lifting his blade up. Grimjow was absolutely livid now. Don't you dare, Noitra. Why not? Noitra asked him mockingly. In this condition, Tennyson's helpless. Might as well finish him off while he's like this. Why you? Grimjow raised his blade, ready to attack. That will be enough. Grimjow, Noitra. Grimjow, his Fraxian, and Noitra froze when they saw Tozen and Stack approaching them. Nakim quickly released Lilinet, who took the time to kick him in the shin before running to join Stack's side. Grimo swore under his breath. Tozen. By then, Swampfire had fully regenerated. The Methanosian rubbed his head in annoyance. Oh man, now I know what it feels like to get put through a blender. Then he noticed there were a few more people out here than before. Tozen? Stack? Noitra? Tozen did not react to Swampfire, focusing entirely on Grimjow. Did you think your actions would go unnoticed simply by being outside Las Notches, Grimjow? You assaulted our guest and risked killing him. How can you possibly justify your actions? Swampfire said nothing as he changed back into his human form, though he and Grimjow locked eyes. TCH, Grimjow looked away, a bored and uncaring look on his face. Tozen grit his teeth at the blatant disrespect. We were just having a spar and I guess I got carried away. But his tone indicated that he wasn't even trying to lie. And of course nobody believed him for a second. Tozen, in particular, was livid. Trying to kill someone while passing it off as a mere spar, he decided to really drive the nail in this time. Lord Aizen is very upset. That got a reaction. Grimjow and his Fraxian all paled at this news. Lilinet shot them a smug smile, while Stark remained indifferent. Ben crossed his arms, waiting to see what Grimjow would do next. Grimjow became sour when he realized there was no way out of this. Fine, he growled. Tozen nodded. I'll leave Ben Tennyson in your care, Stark. I hope you will keep a closer eye on him in the future. Stark looked at the ground guiltily. Whether or not it was because Ben had been in harm's way or because he let Aizen down was hard to tell. Tozen turned around and started heading back towards Las Notches. Seeing they had no other choice, Grimmjow and his Fraxian followed after him. Grimmjow shot Ben a parting look. Much like within Neutra, Ben knew this was far from over. Once Grimmjow and his Fraxian left, Stark faced Ben. "Sorry about that," he muttered, scratching his head. "I should have known Grimmjow would pull something like this." "If I hadn't gotten caught, Ben would never have had to fight Grimmjow," Lillinet admitted. "I doubt it," Ben said, bringing everyone's attention back to him. "Grimmjow's like in Neutra, right? Doing whatever it takes to get his way." "That's for sure," Stark said. "And simply ignoring him wouldn't work," Ben continued, thinking about how vicious the sixth Espada was. "He would do whatever it took to get me to fight him. Even if you hadn't been there, Lillinet, he probably would have ambushed me or something." He looked over at Neutra, who was eyeing him and grinning. Ben still didn't like the guy, but hey, he was nothing if not grateful. "I doubt you were doing it to be nice, but thanks," Ben said. Neutra just rolled his eye. "If anyone's taking you down, Tennyson, it's me. Grimmjow will just have to find some other prey." His grin got bigger. "And if he doesn't, I'll gladly remind him." Ben grimaced as Neutra started walking back to Las Notches as well. So far the majority of the people here were simply charming. "Ben," Stark said to the hero, "for the time being I want you to stay in our chambers. Never go anywhere in Las Notches unless I'm with you." Under normal circumstances, Ben would have argued that he could look after himself. But his fight with Grimmjow caused him to realize that he better lay low for the time being. "All right," he relented. Stark nodded. "Now come on, let's go back." "Yeah," Lillinet said, in an uncharacteristically quiet and subdued tone. She was still pretty guilt-driven over how Ben got in his predicament. Ben saw this and put a hand on Lillinet's shoulder. The little Arankar flinched at first before looking up at Ben, who gave her a warm smile. "I'm fine, Lillinet. Like I said, Grimmjow probably would have done something else if he didn't threaten you. So don't blame yourself." Lillinet sighed. She still blamed herself, but she decided to take Ben's advice. "Okay." Ben smiled before continuing his way back to Las Notches. Stark lagged behind to speak to Lillinet. "Never thought you'd get so close to a human," he noted, "especially one you've just met." For once, Lillinet didn't lash out at him, something that Stark noticed and was grateful for. "I don't know," she said quietly. "At first I was just curious about him. He was different, he was new. But he's also really nice and actually kinda fun to hang around." "We Arankar aren't used to things like kindness and having fun. Maybe that's what draws you to him," Stark guessed. Lillinet tilted her head at Stark's theory before looking back at the ground. "Maybe." Later that day, night, whatever it was, Ben, Stark, and Lillinet were all in the first Espada's palace. Nobody said anything, just sat around, trying to find some way to pass the time. Although Stark was lying down on his pillows, he was wide awake and staring at the ceiling, more alert than ever. Ben was sitting against the wall, replaying the day's events over in his head, which he considered a wake-up call. The Arankar were a lot more dangerous than he had given them credit for, so Ben decided it was best for him to plan ahead in case this sort of thing happened again. And he had a really strong feeling it would. He was also grateful to Azimuth for upgrading the Ultimatrix, having an equally strong feeling that he'd need to use it to the limit in case any of the other Espada were just as bad as Grimmjow and Neutra. He gave Ulquiorra and Berrigan more concern since they were the most powerful alongside Stark and Harem. Speaking of Azimuth's upgrades, Ben blinked as he realized something that hadn't occurred to him due to all the excitement. What were the odds that he would get sent to another universe almost immediately after Azimuth upgraded the Ultimatrix? Did Azimuth know this was going to happen to him? Were the upgrades done solely for when Ben came here? If that was the case, then why didn't Azimuth warn him or at least say something more helpful than a simple "take care of yourself"? Ben vowed that he would have a long talk with the Galvin once he got home. Just then the door to Stark's chamber opened, drawing the attention of the room's occupants, though they were all stunned to see none other than Aizen at the door. "Lord Aizen," Stark stuttered, shifting around to stand up only to freeze when Aizen raised his hand. No need for that, Static, the Lord of Lost Notches said. Stay as you are. I simply wish to have a talk with Ben here. Well, this was rather unexpected. Ben thought he would have sent some messenger to get him, not come in person. But then again, having gotten into a fight with two of his warriors in quick succession was a serious enough reason. Of course, Lord Aizen, Stark said. Everyone looked at Ben now, waiting for his reaction. Sure, Ben said, after realizing the spotlight was on him now. Aizen smiled. Wonderful. Walk with me, Ben. Ben shoved his hands into his pockets as he followed the ruler of Lost Notches out of the room and into the hallway. Ben wasn't sure where they were going, but he took this time to start memorizing everything he could. Sure, he was annoyed at easily one could get lost in a place like this, but it was actually a piece of cake compared to the Perplexahedron. At least Lost Notches didn't have death traps. Or did it? Ben, I would like to apologize, Aizen said, and Ben was not expecting the truly remorseful tone in his voice. Things got worse when Aizen turned his head to look at him with a guilt-stricken face. Ah, was all Ben could say. Despite being taken from your home, your loved ones, you offered to help me stop Soul Society, and my espada have repaid your kindness by trying to harm you. Aizen pinched the bridge of his nose. I thought it was only OMNITRIX that I needed to worry about, which is why I wasn't too concerned. But now I find Grimmjow acting behind my back and attempting to kill you. He looked at Ben almost pleadingly. I have been a horrible host to you, and for that, I am deeply sorry. I would not blame you if you wish to have nothing more to do with us. While I will do everything in my power to keep you safe, if you do not wish to fight the Soul Society, then you don't have to. I'm sure I can find shelter for you in the world of the living until we have dealt with them. Then I will come back for you and help you find a way home. Ben did his best not to let his frustration show. Aizen was so different from how he acted when they first met. What brought about this sudden personality change? Aizen gave a small smile. No doubt you're curious as to my change in behavior. He chuckled as Ben made a face at his mind yet again being read. It's perfectly understandable. Quite the contrast to how I was when you first met you. Aizen sighed. The reason for my demeanor is because it's necessary for me to keep the Arrancar in line. Ben tilted his head at this answer. How come? Because while there are Arrancar such as Harem and Sterk, who leave well enough alone, most only respect power, Aizen explained. As you could not doubt tell due to how so many of my soldiers have treated you with hostility. I must appear aloof and cold in order for the majority to listen. Even though I help them become more human-like, their bestial nature does not fully go away. Law of the jungle, Ben figured. Survival of the fittest. Aizen smiled in admiration. Very good, Ben. That is exactly the mindset of Hugo Mundo. Ben sighed as he scratched his head. Not that the clemency made the situation any better. Could he really be able to work with people so anxious to kill him? So, Ben, Aizen said. About my offer, what do you choose? Ben looked Aizen square in the eye. He still didn't fully trust Aizen, and while it was dangerous to say here, at the same time staying in Lost Notches was the only way to keep an eye on whatever was really going on. Besides, if innocent lives did hang in the balance, Ben couldn't just turn his back on them. Regardless of the risks, he was going to stick it out. I'll stay, he said finally. I'm used to people trying to kill me back home. Just another day in the life of BEN10. Sad how true that statement really was. Aizen's face was full of relief. While I would have respected your decision either way, I am grateful you chose to remain here. He put a hand on Ben's shoulder. I have a feeling that together, there is nothing we can't accomplish. That didn't really make Ben feel any better. Of course, Aizen said, taking his hand off Ben's shoulder. If you're going to fight Soul Reapers, you deserve to know how they fight. So I will have Tozen train you. What, really? Ben asked in surprise. Aizen nodded. Now Soul Reapers have their own unique abilities, which Tozen will explain to you during your training. But I have a feeling that once you have a basic understanding, you'll be ready for them. Ben gave Aizen a half-hearted smile at that. Hopefully. Well, I'll leave you to it, Ben. Get some rest. You'll need it for when Tozen comes for you. And good luck. With that, Aizen left. Ben watched him leave before making his way back to Stark's chambers. So he was going to be taught how to fight Soul Reapers. He had wondered what they could do, and now he was going to find out. "So what did Lord Aizen want?" Lilinet asked once Ben returned. "He wanted to apologize about what happened with Grimmjow," Ben said. "And he offered me the chance to back out if I wanted to." "What did you say?" Stark asked. "I'm sticking around," Ben replied. Stark and Lilinet were surprised he'd be willing to say, but Stark simply shrugged. If Ben wanted to stay, then he wanted to stay, simple as that. On the other hand, Lilinet smiled. She didn't want Ben to leave just yet. He was making Lost Notches interesting, and she wasn't looking forward to it getting boring again so soon. The three were startled by a sudden knocking at Stark's door. "Now who could that be?" Ben asked aloud as he answered the door. He took a step back when it turned out to be none other than Harable and her Fraxian. While Harable looked Ben directly in the eye, her Fraxian seemed more interested in looking off to the side or at their feet. "Ah, hi, Harable," Ben greeted, looking back at Stark and Lilinet, who were just as confused by the third Espada's presence as he was. "Hello, BEN10, Harable replied before looking over at Stark and nodding respectfully. Stark returned the gesture. "What brings you here, Harable?" Stark questioned. "We heard about what happened," Harable explained. "I wondered whether or not Grimmjow would try to pull something like this, especially after all the rumors regarding Ben being more powerful than Espada 6 through 10. Ben frowned as he crossed his arms. "So he tried to kill me just to prove he was better." "But why did you have such a hard time against him when you were able to fight Enoitra evenly?" Mila Rose spoke, looking at Ben for the first time since she got here. "I underestimated Grimmjow," Ben explained to her. "I had a feeling he loved to fight, but I didn't expect him to be that vicious." His eyes were full of determination. "It won't happen again." Everyone could tell that Ben wasn't saying this out of arrogance. Of course, since he could just use another alien to fight Grimmjow, his confidence was not unfounded. "But for now," Stark spoke up, "I'm gonna have to keep a closer eye on him to make sure Grimmjow and Enoitra don't pull anything else. Maybe if you're lucky, they'll decide to fight each other first to see who gets to fight you," Sung Sun suggested. "That'd make things easier," Ben said as he rubbed his head. Then he noticed Harable's gaze on him, making him very slightly uncomfortable. He was just about to ask her if something was wrong only for her to speak first. "It sounds like you could use some more allies," she crossed her arms. "My Fraxian and I will help you in any way we can." Everybody present stared at her. "Lady Harable?" Apache asked with surprise and confusion. "Ben10 has been torn from his home, forced into a world he knows nothing about, participating in a war that has nothing to do with him, and those he is supposed to fight beside are trying to harm him," Harable explained. "Besides, we are indebted to him. Helping is the least we can do." Apache, Mila Rose, and Sung Sun all shifted uncomfortably. Whether it was because Harable wanted them to help a human, or because they didn't like being reminded over how Ben saved them, he wasn't sure. "Well, thanks," Ben said to Harable, before smiling at her. "I'll try not to be a burden." Harable said in reply before turning around to leave. Her Fraxian shot one last look at Ben, almost apologetically, before following their leader. Ben said after a minute of silence following their departure. What a day. At least Ben knew he had some friends sort of in this place, and he appreciated them wanting to help keep those like Grimmjow and Enoitra off his back until he could think of a way to deal with them on his own. He also needed to find a way to see if Aizen really was legit about all the things he said. And who was he to turn down the company of 4 very attractive, albeit dangerous, ladies? "Oh!" he suddenly cried out when something smacked him upside his head. Ben turned to face the perpetrator, an irritated Lilinet. "Don't let it go to your head," she grumbled before stomping off. Ben stared at her in confusion as he rubbed his sore noggin. He looked over Stalk for clarification, but the first Espada just shrugged uncaringly. "What a day," Ben said again. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 4. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Bigby the Big Bad Wolf FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.